you for joining us. If you are joining us at this Fireside chat, joining me today, as always, is Andrew, my co-host, Andrew Valkauskas, who I think I actually pronounced his first and
What's
last name
going on?
properly this
How'd you
time.
do that?
I don't know. I've been practicing, in the mirror every single day. And with us is another Andrew. Andrew, I'm going to do my best here.
Over here?
Behringer?
No, but I've heard that one a lot.
Okay. I was trying. It was the T
It's
that makes me go, wait, please?
right. That's the P is silent. It's Fringer.
Fringer. Okay. And John Sexton. So
No, the S is silent. It's Exton.
Oh, Exton. My bad. Okay.
No,
Well, actually, they have their own podcast, which has been running since 2013. So, tell us about you guys. How you doing? Give us a bit of a rundown of who you are and what you do.
Okay. John, you want to tell them a little bit about the podcast?
Sure. So yeah, we are the co-hosts of SagaThing, which is what was originally going to be about a 4 or 5 year mission to troll through all the Icelandic sagas. We are 8 years into our 5-year mission and expanding. So we are kind of more next generation than original series Star Trek. Right now we are essentially working our way through only the family sagas, but eventually we hope to cover all of Icelandic literature, really. The podcast began because we got tired of not getting to hang out and talk about sagas. Andy and I spent a lot of time in grad school drinking beer, eating pizza, and working our way through Icelandic sagas. And once we both got jobs in different parts of the country, it was very hard to find time to do that kind of thing. And so the podcast really began as a chance to kind of get together once again, have a beer, and try to out-nerd each other on the sagas. And we just kind of decided to invite the world to listen.
Yeah. And the basic idea is that we pick a saga. We offer what was at the beginning supposed to be a very brief summary of the saga that has expanded into a not so brief summary of whatever saga we've chosen, with episodes lasting quite a long time, about an hour and a half usually. And we put them out about every 3 weeks is when a new episode seems to drop. And we talk about not only what happens in the saga, but we try to offer some historical context. We talk about some literary theory, literary devices, follow the tropes that are in the sagas, and really just work on evaluating what the author's attempting to do, or the authors are attempting to do. And when we finish with that summary, we have a judgment section. And that's where we bring it to the SagaThing. A thing is all your people know what a thing is, but it is the assembly site where the trials would always happen. And that's where we put the saga on trial, and we judge things like best bloodshed. We offer a body count. We send people out into outlawry. We choose a thingman, someone who is one of the better characters of the saga that we want to join our individual mead halls and support us in our combat against one another for the ultimate battle that will happen at the end. Right, John?
I mean, if you can call it a battle.
And the length of your
easy on it.
sagas, too. I love your measurement of saga length.
Yes, yes, the Hrafnkel measure.
Yes.
The Hrafnkel, each saga is measured by its relationship in length to Hrafnkel saga, which is a ridiculous measurement, but
I love it.
It seems to have stuck, and it makes sense to us now.
No, absolutely.
There's a Twitter bot that talks about Icelandic sagas, and it constantly refers to the length of the sagas in Hrafnkels.
Beautiful.
So somewhere along the way, it sampled our online blurbs.
You started something.
Right. Well, whoever set that up, because that can't just be that has to be set up by a human being, right? I don't know how Twitter bots
I don't know
work.
how this works.
I mean, I work in IT, but I mean,
Someone configured it to scrape something from certain websites.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. And I discovered you guys early on. I remember, I think you guys only had like 3-4 episodes done at the time. And I went through them, and I think I reached out to you guys. I'm like, freaking amazing. We're like, I want to see more. I want to hear more. And it was something that helped me get a lot of my friends into sagas as well, because, I mean, one of the things, the big critique is that most professor translations of the sagas are kind of dry and a tough read. Anyone trying to read Beowulf academically will attest to that it's a slog for the general population if they're not really, really into the theory crafting behind the literature. And you guys make it very, very accessible, very entertaining. And for me, I think I just have like backlogs that I would put together on my phone. And then when I do a long drive to a convention, I'd have that on the radio and be listening to several episodes back to back, getting into the Viking groove as we go and represent the Vikings at the next gaming con.
Yeah, which is great. And I think there's such a nice overlap between what you guys are doing and what we do. We talk about the original source material, but you're actually taking that source material and turning it into something that's accessible to modern audiences to play and imagine and do really, really cool things. And so I think it's wonderful what you guys are doing as well.
Oh, it's very, very cool. This kind of material, I remember our first Kickstarter, the highest backer got to choose which saga they would want represented at the back of the core rulebook. And he just couldn't decide. He was like the longest time. He's like, oh, it's going to be Njal's, it's going to be Egil's. And he was picking the like really long ones. And we're like, this has to be like an intro saga. And then he settled on it.
White.
Yeah, he went with Egil's saga. And then there,
really?
I said, I don't know if I can do the whole thing. There's no way I can do the whole thing. I need a scene. And he's like, no, it's up to you guys. You guys pick the scene. And so for me, it was the Sodoi and Atloy scene where you've got the storm going on, and the king comes to visit, and Egil's there, and Bard tries to poison him. And I thought there's just like a really good like Viking murder whodunit vibe that you throw the players into in this banquet hall.
Oh, yeah. So many great scenes from the sagas lend themselves so well to role-playing games, which that's exactly what you guys have tapped into so nicely. But I know both John and I play D&D, and I haven't done any world building myself just yet. I use kind of core books, but I can create scenes, pools, storylines, whatever you want, characters straight from the sagas, because it's such a rich world. They do such a nice job of painting that picture.
I've actually been afraid to use the sagas for drawing my material from, because I mostly play right now, just because of COVID and everything. I'm DMing for my wife and kids.
Nice.
And if I try to draw from the sagas, I'm afraid they're going to know. And that they're going to know exactly what to do, who to talk to, where to go, how to get the boat.
Wait a minute.
Because they've listened to me bang on about sagas now for a very long time.
Are you saying your very young children know the sagas back and forth?
I am saying that they're quite familiar with quite a few of them, yes.
See, that's where you take advantage of that, and then you lean into that. That's where you take advantage of that, and then you lean into that, right?
Right.
And then you lure them into a sense of false security by using that, the thing. They're like, oh yeah, I know this. He talks about it all the time, and then you bring them into the trap.
Right, and then undermine it, yeah.
That's just my sadistic DMing side. Don't mind me. So it's like.
But the funny twist that I've noticed running the Icelandic sagas or actually any of the Norwegian sagas for players is that a lot of the time the protagonist, the main character, is kind of obnoxious and annoying and rubs the players the wrong way.
Well, I assumed you were talking about the players. I thought that was just kind of how players work.
They're like, why are we allying with this guy again? He's a total ass.
Yeah, we're currently working our way through False Brother Saga, the Saga of the Sworn Brothers, and the protagonist in that one, particularly this guy named Thorgeir, is one of the biggest bad guys that you can imagine in terms of what you think of a protagonist being. He's worse than Egil. He's worse than Grettir in many ways. And he's
coded as a villain, right? I mean, in any normal text, he would be the villain.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we recently, in our last episode, we talked about him riding past a group of men who are resting at the side of the road after a hard day's work, and the shepherd in particular is kind of standing with his sort of head bowed down in exhaustion. As he rides by, he just reaches down and lops the guy's head off with an axe and just keeps riding. And when his friends later on say, what the hell was that for? What did he do to you? Nothing. It's just that he stood so well poised for the blow. It's such a villain moment, and yet this guy is the guy whose story we follow.
Yeah.
I mean,
you get this sense of, I don't want to say it's development in the sagas, but I tend to think of the later sagas as commenting on that kind of hyper-masculine culture a little bit and kind of exposing something of the violence and the cruelty of the true Viking characters that you see in some of the sagas. So there is a lot of awareness within the Icelandic literature of that period that says some of that behavior, especially the really egregious violence, like what John just describes, that's unacceptable, and we need to find a different way of doing things.
And do you guys find that well, to begin with, a lot of the sagas are kind of just a chronicle of who's who's descended from whom, to kind of like, etch that into stone of who lived here and who did what. But do you guys find that there's editorial slants against certain families or clans or just people, notable people in Iceland, by whoever wrote them, that it was just very clear that it was descendants of maybe a rival family or whatnot? Or do you find it less editorialized than, for example, let's say the Heimskringla or the Gesta Danorum, right? So you've got the Chronicle of Kings, which was a Norwegian text, and Gesta Danorum, the history of the Danes, and those were clearly highly editorialized, slanting towards shaming their foes.
Andy, what do you think?
I was going to let you do it, John.
All right. So what I would say is you absolutely find that the saga author has an individual perspective. Right? So the problem is we don't know who the authors are. Right? They are anonymous with one or two possible exceptions. And so while the opinions are there, the problem is knowing what is personal opinion and what is the story as it has been passed down. Because you don't know the personal allegiance of the person writing unless it's truly obvious.
And further complicating things is the fact that we don't know when they were written either. So we have this broad period of about 150 to 200 years within which any one of these sagas can kind of fit, and we can really only rely on references to things, manuscript history, stuff like that to identify when something was written. So it's really difficult.
History is biased, I guess. So
you do find bias against certain individuals, certain behaviors, I would say.
Yeah.
That there are many of the sagas betray a kind of a classist attitude. Right? The sagas are written by and for the landed gentry of Iceland. They aren't really reaching out to the field worker. They aren't reaching out to the unfree laborer in the household. Those people are often treated as lesser, right, or expendable. But in terms of individuals, yeah, there's I would say there's more obviously prejudices in favor of certain families, because those are the families whose descendants are running Iceland at the time the sagas are being written.
Yeah.
So anybody who is an ancestor of Snorri Sturluson, for example, it's going to come off reasonably well, or at least have a starring role, because Snorri is interested in upping the family history.
And he's the one
going to go out
for
of their way. They're going to go out of their way at the end of the saga to connect that genealogy of whatever the family that they were talking about, who established their property claims and their good name and all of that stuff. At the end is going to be this long genealogy that says, and he was married to this person who had this daughter who got married to so-and-so, and that led to this great clan, which might be Snorri Sturluson's clan, it might be another clan, but they're definitely making those connections if they can.
Yeah, for our next Kickstarter, one of the books that we're producing is a comic book version of Irbygg's Saga, and that
yes.
was a big one on the genealogy right to begin with. So in order to make it a little bit more concise, I'm working with the artist on how we can get that down into much smaller imagery and less of a wall of a text, and basically really just get to the story as quickly as possible.
Yeah,
I'm going to put out there that you may have chosen the wrong saga if what you're looking for is to reduce the cast and keep it simple.
Oh, I agree. But what we're looking for, this is a comic book, like humorous comic book. This is going to be something that's going to be funny, and the art style is like really, really over the top, hilarious.
so good.
And so I think, out of the sagas that I'm aware of, like I don't know as many as you guys, that one made me laugh throughout. There were so many funny moments there with like the Poop Island and the undead otters and.
Wait, okay. I have a question about Poop Island because I did listen to that podcast episode actually from you guys earlier today. Is it actually Poop Island, like direct translation, or is that just what you guys call it? Because
that is actually us being as PG-13 as we can be.
Okay.
For what the island's actual name is.
Okay, but like that basically. Okay, I got you. Okay,
you get the idea.
Yeah, I got the idea. Okay.
Yeah.
I just like for my headcanon, I needed.
It is literally for folks who might be listening who are not familiar with the story. Briefly, this is the story of two clans who sort of share power in a region of Iceland. One of the clans is led by a deeply religious man who has dedicated an entire hill to Thor, and holds meetings at the top of the hill, but refuses to allow anyone to relieve themselves on the hill. And so he's created a rule: you have to go all the way down the hill and out to a tidal rock that is only visible at certain times, and do your business on this rock, and it is called Poop Rock. And then the tides come in and wash this thing clean every few hours. The other family eventually objects, as you might imagine, to, as they put it, wearing out their shoe leather, traipsing up and down the hill all day. And they decide they're not going to stand it anymore. And so during the next meeting, they collectively drop trow, and there is a protest defecation or urination, it's not terribly clear which, right there on the hill. And then they're trying to sort of do back up their trousers while fighting off the men who are now trying to kill them for having desecrated the hill. The sagas are wonderful.
The visuals from this one are through the top.
The visuals are great.
Over the top.
What's missing in that it's a fun story, and it's kind of a funny story, as you guys suggested. But what's underlying all of that is a political conflict that's happening between these two families. One is a family that got there first and established all the rules and the norms, whatever. And the other family kind of came in piecemeal, but through marriage alliances and bringing over other family members, they expanded to become more powerful. And now using this poop rock as the kind of the central symbol of power, that's what they're competing over. And so this defecation or urination that the younger family does is they're staking their claim on power in the land at that moment. So it's a beautifully written story to talk about some really complex things about Iceland's history.
And there's undead.
Right,
And there's
And witches.
What makes that story even more complicated is that there's more families than just those two, and each other family must then try to figure out their own best path forward as they try to negotiate these two massive clans, conducting what eventually ends up being a 6 or 7 generation feud.
Yep.
That does eventually result in lots and lots of undead wandering around, because there are a lot of people who have died violently or died unexpectedly or died tragically who are not resting easy. And sort of as the saga goes on, the region becomes sort of filled with the restless dead, and that kind of spills over at various times.
And I love the way they deal with the restless dead. It's not the way a role-playing group would have handled it.
Really, they wouldn't sue the undead to make them leave.
Yeah.
Wait, how did they deal with the
Bring out the lawyers.
They sued them. They actually sued them for trespass.
Yes.
I'm sorry, they deported them or something?
Yes.
Like,
No, they
Illegal
served them with an
aliens.
eviction notice. At which point the undead sort of look up mournfully and say, "We stayed as long as we were allowed," and they just kind of wander off. Each of them gets kind of a parting comment in as they sort of slowly get up, gather their things, and go.
I wish I could share some of these pages with you guys on the stream here. We've got about 5 pages done already. It's hilarious. We got the poop rocks and the Sacred Mountain section done.
It's absolutely. People often ask me, "What is your favorite saga?" And that one, there are sagas that are better written.
Oh, yeah.
But man, that one, the Airbnb Saga, I come back to all the time. Yep. It's one that I've read probably more than any of the other ones. It's just got so much going on. It is just chaotic in terms of how it's structured and written. But man, each of those individual scenes, they work so well.
Yeah. And it's still, I would say, we've been doing this podcast now for just going on 8 years. That is like the second saga we did, and it's still the time that you lost it the most recording an episode. The moment trying to explain the ghost seal coming up through the floor and rolling its big brown eyes at people as they all sort of crap themselves in terror. Andy just, I mean, despite the number of times we've read that scene, you couldn't keep it together, man.
Well, especially because as this seal kind of pops up out of the ground, he hits it with his hammer to try to knock it back down, and it's a
whack-a-mole.
We call it whack-a-go seal.
Whack-a-go seal.
It's such a hilarious scene.
I'll see if I can get the
If you haven't
cover
listened to
on.
that episode, I highly recommend listening to that episode and fast-forwarding to near the end. I think we're halfway through. I don't remember where.
It's like mid-endish, like
mid-endish. Yeah. There's the screaming laughter.
The seal's on the cover, actually. I'm going to toss this on the stream. The stream's
Nice.
Whoever's on the stream might be able to see this.
Yeah, we can see that. Yeah,
You see it?
cover them over. Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have an other open window for the
No, we do
stream.
not.
Okay.
I wouldn't know how to open more than one.
We'll send you a link.
No
later,
problems.
but,
I'll just shrink it down to the side now. But yeah, we've got.
I can't wait to see all of that. It's what a great saga to illustrate and just flesh out.
So speaking of like unique and interesting, like sagas just in general, what would you guys say is like either your favorite or least favorite saga that you've worked on? And actually why? Like just like in a nutshell, what is it that made it your favorite or like horrible? And like that doesn't necessarily mean for the podcast, that just means in general from what I understand. So
I've said in a number of places that there are other sagas that I think are better works of art. Gisli Saga to me is the perfect kind of epitome of what a saga should be. It's got a very straightforward story, and yet it contains all the elements. It's got the difficult family relationships. It's got absolutely over the top scenes of action. It's got sort of chase scenes and cat and mouse games of people hunting down outlaws. It's got all the things you would hope that a saga would offer. And yet it doesn't have that cast of 200 people, 75 of whom are named Thor, that can make some of the sagas so difficult to penetrate if you're not familiar with them.
Yeah, Gisli Saga is always a great answer, and I usually agree with that. But for variety, I'm gonna throw out Njal Saga, which is another kind of classic answer. But Njal Saga really shows you the kind of depth that a saga can get to. It's got very, very complex characters, big universal questions about what it means to be human, what it means to be just, and also very specific questions that are relevant to medieval Iceland. It's a long, sprawling saga with many, many, many different characters, lots of competing families in there, but some brilliantly drawn characters and brilliantly drawn scenes. There's a lot of good humor in there as well. So if you're looking for something that's both funny and action-packed and deep and even sorrowful and emotional at times, Njal Saga can't be beat. And one of the nicest things about that one too is you can go to Iceland and visit a lot of the sites that are referenced in the saga and just kind of walk around and be like, I'm standing here where this thing happened. And
I still have to do
that's
that.
a really cool feeling.
On my to-do list.
Yeah.
The other thing that's really cool about Njal Saga is that it really kind of it also expands a reader's idea of what a saga can and should be. The eponymous figure, Njal himself, is not a warrior; he's a lawyer, and he never picks up a weapon at any point during the saga. It's not every saga is about men who just cut a swath through their enemies. Njal prefers to eviscerate his enemies in court, and he's very, very good at it. But he never actually does pick up a weapon in anger. He might occasionally drop a hint to his sons that maybe, it's time to go visit the neighbor with a couple of axes. But he would never himself actually get involved in violence because it's just not the guy he is. So sagas aren't, they can be about more than just, the guy with the biggest beard and the biggest axe winning the day. They are stories that incorporate all aspects of Icelandic life.
Yeah, and it's good because it redefines that stereotypical Viking as well.
Yeah.
So, and Njals is, I think, one of the first ones that gets listed usually when someone says, if we can read one saga, what would it be? And usually the answer on Reddit and other places is like, go to Njals.
Yeah.
So I have a follow-up question to that though, because you said something. Is there an actual saga where people have a beard battle? Is that has that ever historically happened? I need to know, just for me.
It's actually the other direction. Njal Saga partly revolves around the fact that Njal doesn't have a beard.
Really?
It's his enemies repeatedly try to slap the name Old Beardless on him, and imply that he's not really a man, and in fact may not have been able to father children, and that his lack of a beard suggests a lack of virility and masculinity. So there's actually 3 occasions in the saga on which he's called Old Beardless, and on each of those occasions somebody dies as a result. Questioning somebody's masculinity in the sagas is a very serious matter. And so, so there is that one. You also do get people who, there's Thorolf Mosterbeard, right? Thorolf Big Beard of Moster Island, essentially.
Yeah.
And you get people like Sigtrig Silky Beard and things like that. People are often very proud of their beards.
Yeah, if you can grow a good beard, you got to, it becomes part of the defining characteristic of who you are. And it gets passed down through history if these are indeed real names. Some of them are.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. That's that was just a personal thought there about the idea of beard combat. I wasn't sure how to work, but that makes a lot more sense.
There's a lot of verbal combat, and there's even a word, fleeting, for just like an insult, like a really well-crafted insult. And the fleetings will be found in sagas and even in the Eddas. Even Odin ends up giving Thor, his son, a good fleeting on one of the passages.
So that's the equivalent of like burning someone's, like you get like a sick burn. So it's like, yo, dude, I just fleeted you. You know, it's like, it's like
Yeah,
all right.
it's the equivalent of the dozens
Yeah.
that we used to play in Miami when I was growing up. I didn't play very well, but I got to see a lot of it going on.
So I'm curious. So you guys have done how many episodes right now?
Gotta be close to 120 now, right?
Something like that.
120.
I don't have any idea.
So
About.
in this journey of 120 episodes, how has the fan reception and fan feedback shaped the journey?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that's happened is over time we've gotten more comfortable taking our time with what we're doing. Early on, if you listen to those early episodes, we kind of push through. We leave a lot out in the interest of trying to create episodes that are consumable, what we thought was consumable, trying to keep them to about an hour long, 45 minutes to an hour. We were also trying to throw the judgments in those same episodes. So what ended up happening was the sagas that we did early on, we don't go into the kind of detail. I know I personally, as we were starting out, felt like we have so much more to say about these things, but we're trying to keep a tight show. Now, from listener feedback, really, but also from just personal guilt, we ended up, and also this is what we want to do and what we want to talk about. All of that is expanded, and so, like I said before, some of the episodes, we will cover maybe 4 to 6 chapters, and it takes us an hour and 45 minutes. Now, I don't know if that's a selling point.
I think it is, though.
But a lot of listeners seem to respond well to that.
Yeah, many years ago, everyone thought no one has an attention span. And I think the biggest podcast in the world, Joe Rogan, basically ended up redefining that by going 3 hours with a guest. And, his audience and listeners just grew and grew and grew. People crave, a meaningful discussion, a meaningful dissection of something.
Definitely. Or even something like, like Critical Role. When I first started thinking about getting into Critical Role, I was like, there's no way I could do that because each episode is 4+ hours long. But yet they are extremely famous, very, very successful. They've got a huge listener base who are willing to sit down for 4 hours on a Thursday night and do that. So I, working my way slowly through that myself, and I'm surprised at how much I can get done while I'm listening to it.
And I would just like to also add and underline the fact that we've all agreed now that Joe Rogan, Critical Role, and us, we're the big ones, right?
For sure.
This is how it works.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Exactly.
exactly right.
There's no one else. I'm pretty sure.
No, I don't think there's no other
None.
sources out there.
It's like, by the way, the chat confirmed 133 episodes. So
33.
Oh, fantastic.
it's like,
And chat, if you guys have any questions, chime in. We'll
Yeah,
ask the
please do.
questions on your behalf.
I already posted it.
You did? Okay.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, given that you guys work on gaming with the sagas, when you are building a game around a saga or building a game around sort of a thematic idea from the sagas, do you look for things that will sort of play well, or do you look for things that are the big show, like the big set piece? I mean, I'm thinking of, to go back to Njal Saga, there is a courtroom drama that takes place late in that saga that is absolutely riveting reading, and is sort of one of the famous set pieces of the sagas.
Yep.
Might not be the most riveting role playing, because it really is just about who knows more minutia about 11th century law.
Right.
So it's what's more important? Is it sort of the iconic moments? Is it the moments that you think are going to click game wise, or what do you look for?
I put the player experience first. So I begin with what do I want to get players to feel and experience at the table first and foremost. And so if it's like a Viking murder whodunit, or a Viking heist, or a courtroom drama, or who knows what, then I will go find the source material that best fits that. Because everything that we try to do here at Pendelhaven is we're sneaky. We try to teach people the history and mythology while they play, and they don't even realize it. So we'll do the research and try to be as close as possible to the original material. But sometimes we do have to fudge a couple things to make things work. Or, in history and mythology, there's tons of things that are contradictory, and we have to make a call that this is how it's going to be in the Fate of the Norns universe. And, the alternate edition or whatever is going to be put in the appendix for completionist sake. And then after that, then we look at, what's the pacing? What are the mechanics that we're going to have to layer on top of the story arc that we're going to be presenting to the players? And it kind of comes together like a cake like that. So it really, first and foremost, it's what do we want the players to feel and experience at the table? And then from there, we go all the way down to the mechanics as the last service that we're providing for the players at the table.
I like to say we're mythologically, historically accurate, but that's
Well, they'll be the judge of that.
Well, and honestly, the sagas, I would say, are taking a very similar approach. Right? That it's the story comes first. That's really how most saga authors think of it. That it's history's good, but if it's a better story, if Kari Salmunderson can do backflips over an enemy sword while sort of on a moving boat, that's a better story. Yep. Whether or not that is actually something that Kari Salmunderson could do, that's something that works in this story and makes him a memorable figure. So we're going to do that.
Yep. No, agreed.
Andrew, speaking of a good whodunit, obviously Gisli Saga has the Who Killed Best in Vestinson, which always plays really well. But in Njal Saga, you have the Who Stole the Cheese story.
Oh,
which could be a really fun one to start playing with.
Oh, I don't remember. Can you summarize that one? That one does not come back to
sounds
me.
good.
What happened with the cheese?
It's
been a while.
There's a famine going on. Is that right, John?
Yeah, so there's a famine, and the food is very scarce at most of the farms. And Njal's best friend, Gunnar, who is, just as Njal is sort of the best lawyer of Iceland, Gunnar is the unparalleled warrior of Iceland. And the two of them are kind of an unstoppable team together. But Gunnar has married a woman who's famous for having had her first two husbands murdered because she wasn't happy with them. And he's now run into a problem where there's enough food around. And they argue about whose fault that is. And that's a very complicated thing about who controls the larder in a farm. But she decides to solve the problem by sending people to steal from a neighboring farm. And when Gunnar comes home and realizes that the food on the table did not come from his own larder, they have a fight. He ends up striking her, and she says, you'll have revenge for that. But when he tries to then dispose of that food by giving it away, the pieces of a wheel of cheese make their way to the attention of the farmer who they were stolen from. And there's actually an investigation that then goes on, and they're able to reconstruct the cheese. They sort of collect all the pieces, put it all together. They sort of put it together, and once they do that, they can fit it to the cheese press on this farm, at which point they know that this cheese was stolen from them, and now they have sort of a tool to use against Gunnar. But it's sort of this real strange sort of emotive investigation that gives you window into material culture, but it's also just a fantastic sort of moment of storytelling.
Viking CSI edition.
Cheese.
Case of the missing cheese.
Exactly. Nice.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Basically, let's talk about some Viking sagas that we've been doing that kind of bit. So what would you say are some of the most memorable characters in some Viking sagas?
Talk about a character who should have his own role-playing game. Ref the Sly. Ref the Sly has his own saga, and I cannot recommend it strongly enough. It's a relatively short saga, has a relatively small cast of characters, so you don't sort of get lost in that sea of names. Ref is a steampunk Viking. He is early in the saga. He sort of is tasked with building a ship. He's never built one before. He's barely ever seen one before. He gets a child's model of a ship and uses that to construct his own ship, which of course is this ridiculous construction of his that can go anywhere and do anything. But later on in the saga, he continues that path of being able to sort of build anything just by imagining it. By the middle of the saga, he's built himself a stronghold in Greenland, and when his enemies try to come and get him, they are foiled by a fire suppression system that he's built into the walls of the fort before he sort of blows the bolts on one wall of the thing, which then collapses on his enemies before his ship rolls out on wheels into the water nearby, and they sort of try to chase him, and he's got a ship that can then reverse course in the middle of the water, and all these. It's
the A-Team. It's the A-Team.
Absolutely. He is absolutely the A-Team. And this is a 13th century text. And they're sort of imagining, like, what if you could put a ship on wheels that could then be removed so that you've got a kind of amphibious vehicle, a kind of, duck boat that can kill people. But they've also determined how you could build a fire suppression system into the walls of this fort. It's not fanciful. It's not magical. He's actually built a series of hollow logs into a pipe system from an aquifer that is uphill from his fort. And so water flows down and then flows around inside the walls. And so if you try to set fire to the walls, it begins to leak. It's
brilliant.
I
It's amazing.
am very impressed.
That's a saga that could give rise to its own role-playing game.
Nice.
So the idea of
I haven't read that
Vikings
one.
is just that's something the world needs.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and that one comes from sometime in the 13th or early 14th century. So we've got some really advanced thinking about engineering, how things could be designed that far exceed what you think is possible at that particular time period. Yeah,
Just the fact that water filtration system would use literally the physics of the mountain, from what it sounds like, is actually super impressive in my head. That is.
And we should say it's not. I mean, it isn't as if everyone else is saying, "Well, he's doing magic." His enemies look at it and go, "Oh, wait a minute, he's got to be using gravity." And so they just dig uphill of his fort and find the pipes and break them so that his fire suppression system stopped working. That it's that it's not just Ref who's clever. Right? That these are people who are collectively, culturally MacGyvers. They live on a volcano in the middle of the ocean, which they accidentally clear cut as soon as they arrive. They've all had to learn to thrive by being inventive and by making do with what you've got. So that you'll find, there are entire battles that take place in the sagas using sled runners and chunks of ice. People are just able to use whatever they've got to hand to do the job they need to do.
Yeah. I would say another great character that I always enjoy seeing is Snorri the Gothi, Snorri the Chieftain. He pops up in a lot of sagas, and he's one of the ones that I remember from graduate school, reading sagas in class and thinking, here's this character that pops up across multiple sagas, written at different times, written by different people, and yet he has a fairly consistent, he's portrayed in a consistent manner. And what's really interesting to me about him is that he's not your standard kind of Viking character. He's a character who is really, really crafty, really, really clever. And he's able to manipulate social relationships in a way that is advantageous to him. He's able to take advantage of people's preconceived notions about him in order to succeed. He's fairly underhanded in a lot of what he does, but very, very impressive in how he does it. And one of the things that I really enjoy about his character is that within something like Eyrbyggja Saga, it shows you how an individual who you don't think is going to be powerful can rise to power, so that in the beginning he's the son of a guy who got killed. He's actually his father was killed in Gisli Saga. He comes from, I wouldn't say nothing, but he comes from fairly humble means. He goes off to Norway, gets himself a reputation there, but comes home in very kind of humble clothing, and uses that to trick his stepfather into selling him the farm that he wanted. And from that, he has a base that he is able to build up his power base, and becomes by the end one of the most powerful men in all of Iceland. And right there you have a story that tells you kind of how 13th century Iceland, this chaotic period of history, came to being. It's through these manipulative, almost cruel, but very, very genius, clever guys like Snorri the Gothi. So really complex characters that are a lot of fun, beyond just the swashbuckling, inventive people that you see elsewhere.
And it sounds like he's consistent through the saga multiverse, so that's pretty good writing.
Yes, within the multiverse, he always shows up. He doesn't really fight himself. He's present at fights, but he has people fighting for him. He doesn't really need to do it himself.
Nice.
Andy, I had an audio issue for a second there. Did you also mention that he's the direct ancestor of Snorri Sturluson?
No, I didn't.
That he's
but that
this is one of the reasons why
very
he
much
shows up in so many places, is that he's the ancestor of the most powerful family in 13th century Iceland. And yet, despite that, he's portrayed, and I would say even-handedly. He's not lionized, right? He's a guy who's regarded
Right.
as sort of clever and sneaky, not necessarily sort of physically overpowering or talented. He's going to be slightly ahead of you in terms of thinking about the problems and in terms of thinking about a solution.
He grows on
Frequently in
you
saga
throughout the
appearances-
saga.
What's that?
He really
He
does.
he grows on you throughout the saga.
Yes.
At the
yes.
beginning, you're like, "Who is this guy?" Like, seems like
Right.
a nobody, and then you kind of like appreciate his wheeling and
Yeah.
dealings and maneuverings by the end.
You get these moments, and I see somebody's just reminded me, it's the infamous Snorri Sturluson.
Yes.
Thank you. That we have these moments in his appearances where he will take somebody aside. There's a sort of thorny problem to be resolved. And they'll just say, and Snorri and Killerstur went off and talked on the top of the hill. No one knew what they spoke of. But then Killerstur has a solution to his problem, solves his problem, and then the next month announces that Snorri Gothi will now be marrying his daughter. That a tit for tat has been worked out, but it's understood that just Snorri is he's playing everyone to get the things he wants.
Nice. So, one of the questions I wanted to ask is, what are some of the sagas that are the least known, like, as you would see as, gems that are hidden from the general population because they haven't shown up on Amazon in terms of, a book that you could buy, but you guys are familiar with them because of academic circles that exist somewhere in university libraries and old print.
I think one of the these are ones that we're covering. So I'm not going to talk about like the legendary sagas, which are so fascinating. And there's many of those. To get most of the ones that are most interesting, you can get them on Amazon. Ben Wagoner has translated a whole bunch of good stuff that I hope that we can cover on the podcast once we finish the family sagas. So legendary sagas are fantastic because
They're so
they
good.
blend that myth and that fantasy that you don't really see as much in the sagas of Icelanders. I have two that I'm thinking of that are really fun. The first is from the family sagas, Finboy Saga. Finnbogi's Saga is how it's kind of spelled. I don't think that one's widely available. I can't remember where the translations are beyond that 5-volume set that we have. But Finboy Saga is such a great kind of old folktale feeling, oral formulaic kind of story, but it's got such a great hero. Finboy is this upstanding, heroic individual who, just like in kind of tall tales, he can kind of set his mind to and accomplish anything. And he fights bears and he fights villains, and he swims against a polar bear at some point. I think a talking polar bear. Some really fantastic stuff. It's a really charming story, and I highly recommend that one just because I think it's a good bedtime story. Is Finboy Saga.
And to get to your earlier point about the prejudice of the writers, Finnboy is in a different saga treated as the villain.
Yeah.
In Vatnsdal Saga, he is one of a pair of cousins who bluster and bully and attempt to embarrass the sons of Ingemund the Old, and then resort to a trick to avoid fighting them in a duel, and eventually have to sort of skulk away once their ruse has been found out. It's very much eye of the beholder. Finnboy is absolutely one of the great heroes of his saga, but is kind of a rat in the saga of Vatnsdal.
Yeah. So Eder, you mentioned biases before, and that's what John's talking about. I was trying to remember which one it was. I'm glad you brought that up, John, because one of the things, if you're looking for biases, it's regional. This region has its stories about its heroes, and a lot of times it shares the same stories as another region because there's a lot of intersection of territory and families and things like that. So it's really fascinating. One of the things I love so much about reading all of the sagas is seeing those same stories told from different perspectives. And almost always, whatever region is producing the story is making their people look good and spinning the story to tell the true story of what happened. That's a great example.
I'm going to jump in. I saw a question about Baldvar Bjarki. and Beowulf. And so talking about recommending sagas, Hrolf's Saga Kraka is, I'm not sure, I think it just recently became available again in a modern translation. The science fiction writer Paul Anderson translated it back in the 70s.
Oh, wow.
And his translation is fantastic. It's really just a fun read. The answer to the question, Baldvar Bjarki, for folks who aren't familiar with the saga, this is it's an echo or a cousin of the Beowulf story. Hrolf Kraka, Hrolf Latterlegs, is Hrothgar. And the story of Baldvar Bjarki is the story of a man.
It's not Hrothgar. He's Hrotholf.
Oh, sorry, Hrotholf. Yes, sorry, I misspoke. And the story of Baldvar is he comes in just as Beowulf does, comes in at a time when the court is being menaced by a monstrous troll. The one in Hrolf's Saga can fly, because there's no point in telling the story again if you aren't going to up the stakes a little bit. But Baldvar, after establishing that he is the biggest, baddest dude in the mead hall by killing a man by throwing a joint of meat at him, he goes and fights the troll and then sets up the wimpiest Viking in the hall to take the credit, because he's taken a shine to him and he decides why not. But Baldvar Bjarki is a werebear, or at least a spirit werebear. He goes into a trance during battles, and then a kind of spectral bear comes and destroys his enemies for him. As for whether it's an influence on the tale of Beowulf, I think we're looking at two distant cousins of the same legend. It's part of a myth cycle of the court of Hrothgar and Hrotholf and that family, the Speardanes. And it's part of that cycle of stories. The fact that there's kind of a Beowulf story cycle is sort of attached to the fact that there's a story cycle about this family. I don't know that I'd want to make an argument for either one of them being the progenitor of the other, so much as they both reflect a story that was told over and over again across the European North for probably hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
So like the Beo bear would be the cousin. Is that basically what we're saying here?
Well, and so Beowulf's name is actually usually treated as a kenning. Right? He is the Beowulf, which of course means bear. Right? A wolf
so
to bees. Even there. So he is still being that. There's that wink in there. That, this is that guy, the werebear. But we're not gonna, this is history right here. We're not doing werebears. But
yeah,
well, we are doing monsters that come out of the
right. No, we're doing trolls. Yeah, absolutely.
Once you hit the heroic sagas, there'll be plenty.
Werebears, you got to draw a line somewhere.
Yeah. Speaking of that intersection of like reality and fantasy, I mentioned the legendary sagas before, and I know you guys work a lot with mythology. Do you find it in your own projects that you tend to work more with one or the other? I'm guessing family sagas that we're working with are less, I'm not saying valuable, but you turn to them less than maybe the legendary sagas or the mythology. Is that true?
Not necessarily. So I would say that the Fate of the Norns universe is like 50-50 mythological and historical. So if you flip through any of the Fate of the Norns books, you're going to find a section that deals with heroes and villains and the geography. So we're primarily set around 935 AD. And when we had our setting, because Fate of the Norns started in 1992 as a passion project. And around 2006, I wanted to fast forward the timeline to Ragnarok. And I had to really think about, when do I want Ragnarok to start historically? Because you've got, something major happening. The sun and moon are getting devoured, and you're dropping into Fimbulwinter. So it'd be really good to have this coincide with some cataclysmic historic event as well. And one of the things that really got me when I was looking through the lineage of kings was King Harald Fairhair. He was extremely successful king. He had wives and mistresses up and down the Norwegian coast. And because of that, he had a lot of children, both legitimate and illegitimate. And when he died at a ripe old age of, I think they said 80 or so, he never left clear lines of succession. And what ended up happening after his demise was all the children started to fight for the throne. Obviously with Eric Bloodaxe being like the one that did not want to negotiate with his siblings and decided to bump them off. And then you've got Hakon, who ended up going to the Christian kingdoms, to Winchester, to Wessex, to try and get the favor of King Ethelstan and his funding to be able to take the throne and then turn the kingdom into a Christian kingdom. And then there's a whole bunch of Halfdens and all kinds of other children. And so I thought this is the perfect time to have Ragnarok strike at this point in history, around 930, 935. And even, now that we've released our Celtic expansion to the world, Children of Eriu, there's a lot of really interesting things going on around Dublin, which is Athcliath at the time. The Vikings have been in power for about 10 years since they ended up killing the High King and routing pretty much all of the other kingdoms, but they don't have the manpower to hold the island. And so we've got this period now where, we've got a crossover between the mythic and the historic. So there's tons and tons of history in there. Same thing with Iceland. So when we detail Iceland, we've got the Althing, we've got the different regions, all the big settlements that are in the southwestern region of Iceland. Other portions are not as well populated. And then we end up having, storylines that end up tying into Ragnarok. Why is everyone going to Iceland right now? Well, it's the land of ice and fire, right? Fire being the key word. It's a nice, warm, balmy spot when the sun disappears. So there's a lot of interesting crossovers that we can do with, the mythology and the history. So I would say it's like equal between the two, but definitely like my knowledge is very much in the Eddas, and the sagas. Like I said, I've read a good, I don't know, how many do I have on my back shelf? Probably 2 dozen. But there's so many more to read. So,
well, that's what SagaThing is for. We read them for you.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you guys on us.
He has been very excited about it. He's been talking about it for a few weeks. So
well, I'm glad to finally be talking with you, Andrew, because we have been just virtually chatting, kind of, as you said, back to the very beginning almost.
Yep.
And I know when you guys put out the Edda, the illuminated Edda, that was such a fantastic project, and I remember pushing that Kickstarter. We finally got the copy, got the physical copy. I love showing that to my students. It blows them away.
Nice.
Just amazing stuff you guys do.
So while we're on that subject, though, what is everybody's favorite Edda translation?
That's a loaded question.
Well, you got to read it in the original. I had to say that.
Yeah.
Smart man.
Old Norse.
That's really funny.
I'll get on my dictionary.
I tend to teach the ones that are most readily available. I mean, that's kind of where I shift is when I'm teaching. I need to find something that's in print and affordable for my students. Yeah, that's always the challenge.
We have a pocket edition,
The pocket, oh yes, the pocket edition. I'm trying to think, which one have I been using most recently? Joe, which one do you use? Well, I'll figure out which one I'm using, and you tell them which one you use.
I'm trying to think which one I'm using currently. Oh God.
Well, see, you got us on the spot, and we can't even think of the
problem
text
is,
that we use.
I'm looking over at my shelf where I have 7 or 8 different translations of the prose Edda. I've only got a couple of the poetic Edda, but the problem is remembering which one I'm currently teaching.
Yeah. I'm surprised you have more of the prose. I found that there's a lot more of the poetic variants out there than the prose.
Really? There are, but yeah, the poetic Edda is harder for students to get into, to be honest.
Yep.
We're dealing with young undergrads who, they're not prepared to handle the complexity and the complexity of the poetry and the amount of gaps that are there in the poetry. The prose Edda lays everything out really, really nicely. So cheers to the infamous Snorri Sturluson for that. I tend to use the Jesse Byatt version, by the way.
Okay.
That's the one I couldn't remember if Jackson Crawford had one.
He does.
He does, and I think that's where I'm headed, is the Jackson Crawford one.
We're going to have him on, actually, in a couple of weeks. Yep.
Nice.
Oh, great. Yeah, I use his Saga of the Volsungs, especially because he put that one out with the Ragnar Saga, which is perfect, because that's exactly what I need when I'm teaching any of these things. I need that follow-through from the Saga of the Volsungs to Ragnar Saga. So he does great work. I want him to keep translating stuff, so tell him when you see him. Please keep going.
Oh, absolutely.
It's great to have that stuff.
So actually, though, on that, kind of again segueing from that, so hearing where your educational parts and you from hearing teaching, where exactly is like what is your well of knowledge? What is your source of information, educational background? What are you guys still active in that? From my understanding, yes, because you're still teaching, but like just kind of
Just
give me
for our
that in a
viewers.
nutshell. Yeah.
Yeah. John, you can go first.
Okay. Well, I mean, our story is going to be, we're going to have very similar answers because Andy and I went to the same University of Connecticut, for our master's and PhD. We both took degrees in medieval studies, which is a very small kind of subcategory of, we sort of live in between the English and history departments.
Yeah, one of the things that, just to flesh that out a little bit, it's an interdisciplinary degree, which was very important to me. I studied as an undergraduate at Florida State University with David Johnson, and he taught me a lot about medieval studies in general. And one of the things that became very clear as I got deeper into the medieval world was that you have to have a strong background, not just in English, but in languages and in history and in culture and all. You have to really focus on a variety of different perspectives and disciplinary approaches. So when I was looking for a graduate school, and I assume this is similar for John, although he can say if it's not, I wasn't looking to get into an English program. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to get into a medieval studies program, specifically because it was interdisciplinary in nature. So I could really focus in on the thing that I was interested in learning about.
Right. I actually came from a non-English background. I don't have, honestly, don't tell my boss, but I don't have any English degrees. I was a history and journalism major as an undergrad, and then went to medieval studies. I'm often, I find myself at something of a loss sometimes in conversations with my colleagues, because they have, that when they studied literature, if they studied medieval literature, they studied it alongside Renaissance literature, late antique literature, 18th century literature, classical literature. That it's, what influenced this and what did this influence, right? Is the teleology there. Our field, our way of being trained was medieval literature, medieval history, medieval philosophy, medieval culture, medieval archaeology, and medieval art, and so forth, right? It's expanding out, right? In what context was this written? Sort of time and place, rather than sort of looking ahead centuries or behind centuries. Time and place. Like, why did this text get written now? Why did it happen there and then? So I think that really informs the podcast a lot as well. That we kind of come at it from this attitude of we're not really especially interested in thinking about how somebody in 2021 would respond to a saga figure, although we try to acknowledge when they're doing things that are really problematic. But we're really interested in, so why would a person in the 13th century write something like this about their 11th century ancestor, and what's informing the way they think about their own past.
Yeah, but at the same time, we both did literature degrees to, that was one of the components of our medieval studies degree.
I didn't do a literature degree.
I'm saying English was part of your medieval studies.
Oh, yes.
You took a lot of literature classes, right?
Yeah.
We both like literature. We both read literature. We both teach literature. And one of the reasons is not just our fascination with the historical moment. Good literature explores universal truths, explores big questions. And there's a lot of that also going on in the sagas, and that's something that I think we try to tease out as well. Or we're maybe not as good at it as we are with the historical stuff, but it's something that I'm certainly drawn to in literature, and I'm always surprised at how deep they can go with those big questions through these fascinating characters.
Well, I've got a question. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Finish your thought.
I was just going to say, kind of just to finish up the teaching thing. John works at Bridgewater State University in Massachusetts. He is a literature professor there.
Go Bears!
I am now at the University of Mississippi, where I was a visiting assistant professor of English. Now I am director of the interdisciplinary studies program here, and working with the English department as well. We both consistently teach medieval literature. That's kind of our area of expertise. So that's what we're drawn to teaching. That's what we're assigned to teach most often.
Nice. Now, one of our next projects after the Celtic kingdoms is heading down towards the Mediterranean and handling the Christian kingdoms, the Holy Roman Empire and the Papal States and the Caliphate in Spain at that time. So, in terms of medieval literature, where would you point myself and my team in terms of research? Because this is probably going to be one of the weakest areas for us in terms of, our libraries behind us, books that we can read.
Well, one good point of intersection, in fact, what I would recommend maybe as your way of getting there is the travel journals of Ibn Fadlan. I don't know if you've looked at those. But that's really great because you do have this this Muslim perspective on the Viking world.
Yeah, that was the travel. That was the Volga trade route, right? Where they were traveling up and down the Volga trade route. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
That'd be the first step, I think. But you're talking about more broadly to gain some level of expertise in that particular area.
Yeah. Instead of just reading history books, I mean, are there any, entertaining summaries, like the equivalent of a saga that would deal with the characters, the places, and the major events of that time? So,
Equivalent of a saga at that time. So this is one of the weaknesses, and I think John would agree with me here. We focus so heavily on a particular moment and geographical area that we don't get the background, that broader background that would say, okay, I'm now an expert in not only medieval Europe, but I can talk about Southern Europe and down into the Middle East. That's not something that I have a whole lot of expertise in. John, he's looking for something like a text, especially a contemporary text that would lay out kind of what was going on down there.
To give you an example, like when we went into the Celtic historical side of things, we looked at what was it, the Chronicles of the English by Bede, right?
Sure, yeah.
So that was something that ended up having a lot of interesting events and people and places. So it would be heading south from the Viking lands. Are there any major medieval texts that you guys would recommend?
I mean, it depends on what century we're talking about.
So again, 930, give or take a generation.
Okay.
It's hard.
I know.
It's a tough time. I mean, you'd probably want to start with Chronicles, but I'm thinking also...
That Penguin edition of the Ibn Fadlan narrative has several other narratives, and that's the closest thing that I can think of to what you're talking about.
Although, I think whenever you're talking about trying to get a feel for, culturally, getting a feel for any place and time in the Middle Ages, one of the things you can look at is popular literature. It doesn't always have to be a saga. It doesn't always have to be a literary creation. If you want to get a feel for people's attitudes, prejudices, you can seek out any time and place is going to have some law, legal text that you can look at. Law is a great way to know what people are worried about. You don't make laws about things that you're not concerned about. It's so knowing what people are afraid of at any given time, culturally, socially. Look at sermons. What are they preaching about? What are they preaching against at any given time? That'll give you a real idea as to what people perceive as the flaws in their own society. Look at a couple of saints' lives. There are saints' lives available for any century, any country, anywhere in Europe, because they are essentially the comic books of the Middle Ages. They were written quickly, they were read quickly, and they were discarded quickly. But there are tons of them, and you can always get a sense for what people think makes for holiness, what people think makes for a good story, by looking at those.
Yeah, you make some very good points. Yeah, and with the saints, that was one of the things that we ended up tapping into for the Celtic church, right? So when we were doing our research, we pulled up like a good dozen saints from that period, and that really gave us a snapshot of just what a melting pot it was of heathen and pagan beliefs along with Christianity side by side, because it was not like the other saint stories that you find in continental Europe. It was very, very, very different. And that's the reason they say the Celtic Church for a very long time was very insular. They didn't send their bishops to Rome for very long periods of time, huge breaks. So yeah, it was a really good idea, and I think the other ones like the laws and the church decrees might be a really good idea too.
Yeah.
And if you do want to look back at, if you're willing to sort of read a later medieval text that looks back at that time, one of the viewers, Hero Sandwich, has just recommended Grettir Saga, because the entire sort of coda of Grettir Saga takes place in Constantinople with the Varangian Guard.
Yep.
And it gives you a real kind of a bit of a cultural sense. It's also weirdly got a lot of kind of set pieces and very kind of stock 14th century literary tropes going on. And so what you're really getting is a 14th century idea about the 10th century, but it still makes for good reading.
Yep.
So we actually had another question that, and it's going to kind of segue into another question that we have as well. So it kind of works out. Is what do you guys think about like the popular like renditions of Viking pop culture, like the Vikings TV show, or something that was actually mentioned is the Vinlan Saga, a Japanese anime or manga. I don't know if you guys heard about that at all.
Yeah, we get that question about the Vinland Saga quite a bit. John and I actually saw the creator of that.
Really?
When we were in Iceland. Yeah, we went to the Saga conference in 2018, and at that same time, I'm sure they scheduled it because the Saga conference was going on. It wasn't related to the Saga conference, but it just happened to be right across the street from the university. He was giving a talk with I forget what the other comic was.
The fellow who does the
Is it Danish?
it's late. Yeah, it's the Danish
Very cartoony kind
comic books about the Norse gods.
Oh yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. I don't.
So anyway, both of them were speaking at this event, and the Vinland Saga was fascinating because he talked about his process. He showed sketches of things that he was like, I'm not supposed to show these, but I'm going to show these. I'm working on. So he talked about his process a little bit, but I noticed as he talked that he never really talked about interacting or working with the sagas of Icelanders at all. I was like, well, it's called the Vinland Sagas. He must be working with the Vinland Sagas in some way, shape, or form. So when Q&A came up, I asked that question, like, what influence do these? And his answer was that he tries not to get influenced. He doesn't read them because he doesn't want to be influenced. What he views this as a very intimate project, and it's coming out of his own imagination. And that's what's important to him.
Okay.
And so at that point, I as a scholar of the saga, I was like, okay, well then, fine. I'm a little less interested now.
I'm out of here.
I have read them. They're very respectful, and they're actually very good.
I suspect that he was not telling the truth about not reading them. I think I often suspect about creative people, right? They don't really want to be held to. But if you look at Grettir Saga, they don't want to be dealing with people criticizing their minutia. So they're much more likely. It's like J.K. Rowling saying she isn't influenced by Tolkien. It's clearly not true.
She's cobbled so many ideas together from so many well-known
authors. She doesn't
authors.
want to deal with Tolkien heads coming out of the woodwork and saying like, well, but if you look at what Dumbledore says,
technically,
that it's much easier to say like, I don't know what you're talking about. Neil Gaiman once famously said that he got halfway through Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces and stopped reading. Then he never finished reading it because he didn't want to know.
That's funny.
Yes, you did. Finish that. I don't believe Neil Gaiman ever stopped in the middle of a book in his life. But it's that I understand the logic there. I understand why you would want out there that you're not responsible. You can't be held to the minutia of these texts. But to answer the other half of the question, the Vikings TV show.
Yes.
That's quite a journey. Andy and I started out. I mean, our first response was, "Oh God, what are they going to do to this?"
Yes.
And then
that first
we were
episode,
at first very pleasantly surprised that not only were they really setting it in time and place. I mean, there's a lot of attention to things that really, they opened themselves up to criticism that they weren't being historical because they were being historical. Right? The fact that several of the figures, particularly Floki, used prodigious eye makeup. That is actually historically accurate. That is a thing that Vikings did, but it looks like a choice made by a makeup artist in 2017 to be cool. But Vikings had a highly developed sense of cool. And so, they coif their hair.
Lots
they
of bling,
put
jewelry.
on their rouge, they put on their kohl before they went to battle, because
they clearly were paying attention to the source material too, which
Yes.
I appreciated watching that show for quite a long time. I haven't. Both John and I kind of stopped watching that show in the last couple seasons. Basically, after Ragnar died, and we saw the Ragnarsons kind of devolve. I lost a lot of interest, which is unfortunate because the Ragnarsson story is so fascinating. But they amped up that drama so much that and Ivar the Boneless's character became so hyperbolized that it became a little less interesting to me. There's still a lot of great.
For anybody who hasn't seen it, seasons 1 through 4 are very much worth your time if you're interested in seeing something that is very much a story responding to a modern audience, but that has really looked at its source material.
But if you know the history, it hurts your head.
We were seasons 2 through 4, I think. I actually overcame my detestation of all things technology and was live tweeting during episodes of the show.
I remember
and
that.
was watching some of this and seeing it. You could actually parse out moments when they are drawing from the Prose Edda, moments when they are drawing from the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, when you could actually sort of trace, clearly this is the book they had in front of them at this moment. There were a couple of times I could tell which translation, and that's not because I'm that impressive, it's because I had that translation too, and they're quoting they did their work.
Yeah, that was good. Last Kingdom is another great example of a show that I think does and I'm surprised because when it first started, I wasn't sure, similar to Vikings, but I read the books or listened to them anyway, and I just enjoy the world that he's created. I like what they have done with the history that I studied throughout my undergraduate and graduate career. They do such a nice job of making it appealing to a modern audience and making it relevant in some ways. So I think that there's a lot of good stuff there. Another thing I would feel bad if I didn't mention, just finished playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla not too long ago, and I had a damn good time playing that game. Especially the storyline is great, and I don't like what they did with Alfred, but that's okay. I loved the part where you drink the potion and you enter the world of the Edda. That was my favorite part of that game. You spend time as Odin working your way through the stories from the Edda. It's such a clever thing to do. So well done, I thought. As a medievalist who wants to make these stories exciting and accessible to students, there's a point of reference that I think that they can appreciate. And now we can go look at the original texts and say, this is what they were thinking of, this is what they're responding to. So it's a great teaching tool, if nothing else.
If you like that one, I would recommend Senua's Sacrifice.
I've also played that and finished that one. Yeah, which is even in many ways better in terms of storytelling and game. Well, I don't know if gameplay is as good, but storytelling and depth of character. That one's fantastic.
Yeah. I haven't played the
and
God
I
of
think
War
the
one.
second Senua is they're working on another one, and it's going to be set in Iceland.
Yeah, I can't wait.
I can't wait to see.
Oh yeah,
what that's
for
going
sure.
to be.
That's gonna be nice.
There's so many good Viking games out there.
Yeah,
even ones that aren't good. There's a lot of Viking games out there these days. So that's good for me in terms of trying to attract students into classes.
Well, we've got 2 videos up on our YouTube channel. I think Ken and I did a top 10 Viking board games and top 10 Viking video games. And so I think those are some of the most popular videos that we put up on YouTube as well, because obviously it brings out everyone's opinion, which is awesome. And so the comment section is just as entertaining.
And I'm going to add, if we're doing popular media and the sagas, I'd feel remiss if we didn't mention Norsemen.
Yes.
Yes.
Which is the best of all of them.
Of course.
Anyway.
For anyone who doesn't know it, I can't imagine anybody who will be listening to this live stream who wouldn't know it. But Norseman is it's got the mentality of what we do in the shadows, but it's the Viking world, and it is wonderful.
Yeah, it is.
That is a fantastic description of it, by the way. I'm going to steal that for the future. Thank you so much. But on that note, I'm out of questions.
Yeah.
So,
Do we have any more questions?
Like the chat has any more?
No.
So this is
perfect. We've run an hour and 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us, guys. This has been fun.
Thank you for
been a lot of
coming.
fun.
It's been
I
good times.
apologize. My dog that is 75% beagle and 25% horse has been kind of running around the room for the last 2 minutes. So there may have been some
I haven't
background
heard a
noise
peep
there.
on my side. So
I haven't heard you either.
No, it's all good. And sorry to our viewers for starting late tonight. We just had a couple of technical difficulties, but we worked through it and we arrived. So, next week we have a game designer from a very well-known game that will be joining us. So tune in for that. Until then, John, Andy, thank you for joining us. Aaron, thank you for emceeing. Have a good night.
Yeah.
Thanks,
So
everybody.
hopefully we can do this fireside things next some other time. You know.
Great. See you again soon.